Thank you for that applause, and with a few friends in the House tonight. The question I have to ask tonight, based on the report, and we're going to talk about the defense report in a few moments, but has the Prime Minister compromised Canada in the Arctic? And how bad is it? We've heard from my colleague, the critic for defense, who did a great job going through some of the shortfalls of what really isn't in the North, what needs to be in the North. And tonight, I'm going to go based on a few comments that I heard from people that I heard in the Arctic that voiced their concerns to me personally, and a little bit about the testimony in defense. So this is the actual report, A Secure and Sovereign Arctic. Anybody can read it online. It's a great report, a lot of great recommendations. But as with this government, as is often with this government, there's a lot of talk but little action. I criticized the former Minister of Defense not long ago about promising billions of dollars, and we found in the estimates they'd only spent $45 million to modernize NORAD. And that's just symbolic of here a government that says one thing and does another. Here are some comments I heard from people that were in the Arctic. We're not ready. Canada is abandoning the Arctic. Madam Speaker, Canada has retreated from the Arctic. Canada has vacated the Arctic. And from Mayor Simon Kukuliktana, he's the Kugluktuk mayor, and he said to me bluntly and with a bit of fear in his voice, "We're not ready." And I must say I was a little bit taken aback by his comment, and I didn't think it would be that blunt, but these are folks that actually live right in the Arctic, right on the Northwest Passage. They're right on the water there, and they see the traffic go by, and they're very concerned about this. Premier Cochrane, or former Premier Cochrane for the Northwest Territories, her comments, Mr. Speaker, the current invasion of Ukraine by Russia is a stark reminder of the importance of Arctic sovereignty. We share a unique border with Russia, the Arctic Ocean. As the Arctic takes a predominant role in the international stage, we want to ensure that the needs of Northerners remain a priority for Canada. It also means that the aspirations of Northerners be given appropriate attention and that we eliminate the gaps between Northern and Southern Canadians. And guess what she said? When asked, I asked her personally, do you feel now that Northerners are a priority? Her comment back to me directly was, we're not ready, Madam Speaker. And a few other comments. We had another professor that testified at the Defense Committee. I was privileged enough to ask him a question. R. O'Brien said, if we don't deter Russia, Canada is going to be affected directly, materially, ecologically, and strategically. And that's one thing we hear a lot about climate change, and the critic for defense spoke to that, about the opening of the Northwest Passage and more traffic that goes by there. But if we don't claim sovereignty and really spend resources and spend an effort about claiming sovereignty and being up there, guess who else will? If we don't, we already have, as a critic for defense said, Russia has already made counterclaims for the Arctic seabed that Canadians claim is our own. So do we trust that China, do we trust that Russia and other countries are going to be as ecologically sacred to our own grounds as they will, as we will? And I think we can say no to that. From another leader, a recent article as of October 13th, 2023, CSIS warning Inuit leaders about covert foreign investment in Arctic documents show. And this is more of a, I call it Trojan horsing themselves into the Arctic and through our firewall or our safety fence in Canada. And in the North, it's our Arctic sovereignty, of course. Natan Obed told CSIS that the ITK, this is the group that he represents, is working to find funding for infrastructure projects and needs to be warned in advance if its potential funding partners pose a threat, especially if the Canadian government is not investing in infrastructure development in the Arctic. Then it pushes our pursuit for partners in investment in other places, into other places, he said. So whether it be a militarily a straight-up threat by Russia, China perhaps, the other way that we are vulnerable is with foreign investment. And I just spoke to the Geosciences Forum in Yellowknife a week ago, and a critical mineral mine, a rare earth metal mine that was the one that the Prime Minister stood and cut a ribbon at just months ago, has recently claimed bankruptcy. And what's alarming, Madam Speaker, is that guess who has shown up to partner to keep the project going? It's Chinese foreign investment. And the critical mineral strategy, as one member said that wrote a critical piece to what had happened there, was that it was a head scratcher. The critical mineral strategy is supposed to be to retain ownership and production and exploration all within our borders of Canada. And yet we're seeing the actions of this government push even investment, mining investment, out of our country. So I'm going to refer to another document that I really relied on a lot when I went up to the north, and it's the Auditor General report. It's called the Arctic Water Surveillance Report. And in it, because again, you know, there's a lot of rhetoric in this place, but I like to quote people that actually have expertise in these areas. And I think the Auditor General, we can all agree, gives a very fair perspective on what's going on up there. And I'll start off with some of his criticisms. Federal organizations' actions did not address long-standing gaps in the surveillance of Arctic waters. 1, insufficient action taken to address gaps and lack of integration among organizations. The lack of awareness about vessels in the Arctic creates vulnerabilities that, if left unaddressed, could lead to incidents that would affect Canada's security, safety, environment, and economy. Number 2, satellites, specifically weaknesses in satellite surveillance capabilities. We have weaknesses now, Madam Speaker, and they're just going to get worse in the future. And this is what probably shocked me the most of all the vulnerabilities that we have in the Arctic. We also found that these radar imagery satellites are at or will reach the end of their expected service lives long before the planned launch dates of the replacement satellites. Now, what that means, Madam Speaker, is the end of service life is 2026. And the launch will be in 2035. That means we'll have a 9-year gap in service, satellite-wise, for the Arctic, Madam Speaker. In this modern era, we won't be able to see what's going on in the north for almost 10 years, Madam Speaker. Number 3, icebreakers. Icebreakers reaching the end of their useful lives and before new ones can be built, similar to the satellite problem. The Canadian Coast Guard fleet includes 6 icebreakers that are suitable to operate in the Arctic. These icebreakers are given between 35 and 53 years old and becoming increasingly prone to breakdowns and expensive to maintain. I had the privilege of going out to one of these icebreakers and speaking with the head of the Coast Guard and many of the members there. And really, you know, these folks do a great job. And I will say a shout out to all the men and women, whether it's the Rangers, the Coast Guard, the military that serve, the Air Force that serve our Arctic. We appreciate what you do for us. And I know my time is getting down. It says I have 2 minutes, Madam Speaker. AOPS, so this is the Arctic Offshore Patrol Ships. Further delays in procuring 8 Arctic and offshore patrol ships. They will allow the Navy to exercise Canada's sovereignty through northern maritime operations and contribute to wider efforts in the north. But again, Madam Speaker, as we've heard with so many other things, they're not on schedule. And there's aircraft too. I just wanted to read a conclusion. This is from the Auditor General of his report. We concluded that the federal organizations we audited, Fisheries and Oceans Canada, Canada Coast Guard, Environment, Climate Change Canada, National Defence and Transport Canada, had not taken the action required to build the maritime domain awareness they collectively needed to respond to safety and security. Risks associated with increasing vessel traffic in Arctic waters. Key, Madam Speaker, while these organizations had identified gaps in maritime domain awareness, they had not taken sufficient measures to address them. Moreover, some measures had progressed slowly, and in the case of Marine Safety Operations Centers were not sufficient. The existing satellite service and infrastructure did not provide the capacity that the federal organizations needed to perform surveillance of Arctic waters. Delays in renewal of satellite ships and aircraft risk compromising the presence of these organizations in Arctic waters. And Madam Speaker, I started off by asking the question, has this Prime Minister compromised us in the Arctic? I think we can all hear from the Auditor General's report and people on the ground that he has. And I would say something even stronger that I heard from somebody in Inuvik, that this Prime Minister has not just compromised us in the Arctic, he has abandoned the Arctic. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I don't know the honourable member that well, but I do know him to be someone focused on a range of different policy issues, and tonight is no different. He raises the matter of defence. He looks at Arctic sovereignty, obviously, relating to the concurrence debate here. I wonder if he could tell us his view on the 2% ask of NATO and what his views are on that, and what his party's views are, rather. Would a future Conservative government commit to fulfilling that 2% ask?
The honourable member for Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And NATO and NORAD is something that I've made my views very clear about tonight. You've heard our views from this side about NORAD, the need to modernize in order to protect our northern front. I think it's unequivocal that it needs to happen. You know, the one thing I will say, the minister, former defense minister, made the announcement of modernizing NORAD. It was $4.95 billion at the time. I applauded her for making that announcement. The sad part is what I referred to in my speech. With that big promise made, only $45 million to date has been spent. And so I think, again, actions speak louder than words. Let's see some action.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Bruce Grey, Owen Sound.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. Recommendation 15 talks about the need to increase primary reserve capability in all three territories in order to upkeep our Arctic sovereignty and defence. 2013 was the Master Implementation Directive to actually get a number of reserve units up from an infrastructure and equipment standpoint. Yeah, when I talk to colleagues, former colleagues of mine in the reserves, they're sitting with snowmobiles that don't even have the infrastructure to store them. They're rotting outside, and this is a decade later. Does a member have any idea why this government has failed to actually provide the necessary support and resources to our primary reserves, specifically when it comes to the Arctic?
The honourable member for Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
Yeah, and the question, I must say, I don't know. You know, we were up there, we talked to Canadian Rangers that go out there with their own snowmobile equipment, their own gear, and it gets damaged and it takes months to get repaired. And this is snowmobiles that they actually use for their sustenance to go get caribou and the like. It's a sad story that we've heard many times. Again, I've been up there many times and spoke with Rangers Direct and some service members as well. You know, again, Madam Speaker, it's not something that we like to stand up here and actually bring up. I'm sure if my colleague from Bruce Grey, Owen Sound couldn't ask that question, he'd been pleased that he wouldn't have had to ask it. All we want to see is that the members in uniform, our Canadian Rangers, are given the resources that they much and they desperately need to keep us safe. I wish the government would just simply do what they promised.
Questions et commentaires. The honourable for Bruce Grey, Owen Sound.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. Another quick question for my colleague. What really scares me about the Arctic, more than, it's not the territorial threat, it's not the threat from Russia or China coming across the Arctic Circle or coming into our north. It's actually about their investments and takeover of our natural resources, our critical minerals, and what more does this member think needs to be done, and as outlined, I believe, in recommendation 18 of the report, to actually put a stop to this malign foreign takeover of critical capabilities and natural resources in the Arctic?
Member for Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, the article that I quoted before, CSIS warning Inuit leaders about covert foreign investment in Arctic documents show what can we do about it. There's a lot that we can do about it. And again, the example that I thought was, again, it's one of those sad things I had to announce when I was up in Yellowknife speaking, was here's a company that the Prime Minister was at, the one rare earth metals project that he cut the ribbon at was going into bankruptcy. Why? Because we have such a regulatory regime that's so burdensome that it pushes those local investors out. And guess who has a way in? Then foreign investment comes in because of that desperation, as Natan Obed said in this document, and we're just inviting in this foreign investment. We're in a sad state. Meanwhile, we have elements and materials that we could be bringing to the world. One of the most green countries on the planet, Canada, could be offering solutions around the globe, but yet here we are.